Welcome to The Composter, a podcast for farmers and composters. I'm your host and fellow composter, Jane Merner. Join me in practical conversation between industry professionals and farmers with a passion for producing high-quality compost. We're going to dig deep into the science, technology, and art of compost production so that we as composters can help enliven the world's soils. Today's guest is Brenda Platt from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, otherwise known as ILSR. ILSR has a vision of thriving, diverse, equitable communities. To reach this vision, they build local power to fight corporate control. They are a national research and advocacy organization that partners with allies across the country to build an American economy driven by local priorities and accountable to people and the planet. Today, we are going to talk about one of the Institute for Self-Reliance's 5 key initiatives. The Composting for Community initiative is advancing local composting to create jobs, enhance soils, protect the climate, and reduce waste through advocacy, training, research, demonstration sites, and coalition building. Brenda Platt is the director and life force behind the Composting for Community initiative. I saw her in action at the USCC Compost Conference. Firstly, getting community composters to the conference, and then giving them a voice at the table. There was an amazing turnout of community composters, and their collective impact was noticeable. Today's episode of The Composter is brought to you by ComTech. Today, more than ever, people are discovering the benefits of compost in gardens, landscapes, and agriculture. However, as composting awareness grows, so does consumer demand. As a result, commercial composters are seeking ways to increase year-round production while maintaining high levels of quality in their compost. For many, the solution is a better process. For over 25 years, ComTech has worked with scientists, agriculture experts, and customers to develop a proven 4-step process that produces healthy, contaminant-free compost while optimizing commercial production efficiency. This process is known as shred, turn, screen, and separate. You can learn more about the ComTech process at comtechamericas.com/composterpodcast. While you're there, request a complimentary consultation to discover if the ComTech process is right for your commercial operation. On our farm, Earth Care Farm, screening used to be the bottleneck in our process. We now have a ComTech M2 multi-star screener, and it has made our composting process much more efficient. ComTech Americas is proud to support the Composter podcast and is ready to help you make the most of a great opportunity. This episode is also brought to you by Vermont Compost Company. Since 1993, Vermont Compost Company has grown from a small local operation to a company supplying premium living soils to thousands of successful growers all over the country. Combining meticulously crafted compost with intentional sourcing of the highest quality materials and amendments, Vermont Compost Company consistently delivers organic growers with the soil their businesses depend on. In addition to product consistency, growers can count on Vermont Compost to provide the technical expertise it takes to make your organic farm flourish. Visit vermontcompost.com. Why grow alone? Enjoy the show. Well, Brenda Platt, welcome to The Composter.
Nice to be here with you, Jane.
I'm just so glad to get to talk to you. It's always a pleasure when I get to bump into you from now and again, which is far too rare. But I want our listeners to get to know you and what you do with Institute for Local Self-Reliance. So let us know, what's your background and how'd you get interested in composting, and tell us your motivations.
Well, let me just start by saying I head up the Institute's Composting for Community initiative, and we're a national nonprofit, and our 50th anniversary is next May, and I've been at ILSR for 37 years of those. I started in 1986, right out of college. I do have a degree in mechanical engineering. I can't say I've used it specifically for engineering, but it has been essential as background, and I'm so grateful to have that. And when I first started at the Institute, I was basically fighting the proliferation of trash incinerators around the country. I think there was something like 300 planned, and ILSR, along with other grassroots groups and national groups, we defeated close to 200 of those. And at the time, the incinerator companies were saying, you can't recycle more than 15% of your waste. So, you need to have a plan to deal with the other 85%. So that led me on a path of documenting the communities with the highest recycling rates. I did a report, I think it was back in 1989, called Beyond 25% Materials Recovery Comes of Age, to kind of show that there were communities that were recycling more than 15%.
Mm.
And then I followed that up the next year with Beyond 40%. I think it was called like record-setting recycling and composting programs. So back in the late 80s, I learned that you can't get to high recycling unless you were composting. Now, back in those days, communities were not targeting wasted food. They were targeting their yard trimmings.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no way you could get to 25, 40% or beyond without doing composting. So I came to the field from a kind of fighting incinerators and the expansion of landfills and promoting waste diversion, and composting was part of that.
That's amazing. That's so great. Have you seen the rates of recycling declining now? I'm just like, this is like a little spin-off, but like there's been so much in the news about the percentages of plastics that are not recycled and things. Are we headed in the right direction with that? Do you know?
Such an interesting question. I think as a country, our recycling rates have stagnated. They've been at, I don't know, what is it, like a third of the waste stream, municipal solid waste. So that's household waste plus commercial institutional waste, like government buildings, hospitals, schools. So municipal solid waste is all of that, not industrial manufacturing waste. And we've been about at a third for many years. And so that's one of the reasons there's been a lot of attention on cutting wasted food, because it's such a big part of the waste stream that has, over many decades, not been a priority kind of at the municipal county level. And I think we're seeing that grow. There's more and more programs with curbside collection of food scraps or drop-off programs, and certainly larger food waste generators like grocery stores and other big generators, big restaurants and whatnot that are targeting food scraps. So we're seeing that grow. But you're right to point out plastics has been a very sad story. And one of the things that I find always interesting is that, if you look at the waste composition studies from the 60s even, plastic packaging was not a huge part of the waste stream. And food packaging in particular has kind of grown and grown as a higher volume of what we throw away every week. And that the fact that was the case in the 70s and 80s is not surprising, but the fact that you walk into any grocery store or pharmacy and see aisles of styrofoam or throwaway products or plastic cutlery is still the case is kind of like nuts in my mind.
Yeah.
So, so there's been good and bad.
Yep. That's the pendulum is back.
And I'll just say, I think what's exciting is seeing the pendulum swinging back now. I'm seeing more and more reuse enterprises. We know people are carrying reusable shopping bags to supermarkets, more durable coffee mugs. We're seeing take-back containers and reusable containers. There's been grocery stores that build themselves at zero waste. So I think it's just going to grow. We're going to move away from single use and we're going to get to more durables.
I like that. I like that term. I also just want to point out, I appreciate so much your use of the terms wasted food and food scraps rather than food waste. I think if our industry can shift and use the vocabulary that really fits properly the mindset that we want to be headed in, this is going to just change people's view on things. So I appreciate that so much about you.
Thank you. And, I do think language is so important in the terms we use. We have long at ILSR tried to, we're not perfect, but we try to say waste is a verb, not a noun. So, one man's waste is another man's treasure, right?
Yeah.
People's treasure. So, so we try to say wasted food instead of food waste. I worked with Urban Orb, one of the nation's champions of reuse and durable goods out in Berkeley. And they like to say, instead of the municipal solid waste, they'll say the municipal supply of discards.
Yes.
Because that's feeding into new enterprises. So I love talking about lexicon.
Yeah.
And how we use words.
For my own staff, I like to use food scraps as the term because these are resources that we're using to make our compost. In most industries, you're buying a supply. We're using these quote unquote resources. I don't want them to be thought of as waste. So we're trying to that verbiage is important. So it's cool. That little bit of consciousness just elevates everything. So it's so great that you're on board. All right. This is a big question, but if you had a blank check to spend on the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, where would you spend it?
Gosh, I wish you could make this so.
Let's do it.
So it's such a hard question, but such a lovely question. So there's so many things, but I'm going to go with the first few that came to mind when you asked me this. Is I would love for the Institute to have some land in its own building that would feature not only food growing on the rooftop and native plants and the landscaping, of course, using compost and having green infrastructure like bioswales and the green roof and rain gardens, but also have this compost education and training site with different size composting equipment where you could bring people, school groups, expose them to the wonders of composting. And of course, because we're the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and we support independent businesses, it would also have an independent bookstore, an independent pharmacy, an independent bakery, an independent grocery store, and a zero waste store, and fix-it clinics, and be a meeting and gathering space. So it's fun to dream about having blank checks. So, that maybe is, we don't have that money, but I would just add to the question that it would be for the work I do with community composters. We facilitate a network of it's close to 300 community composting organizations now across the country and some outside the country. But I would love to have $2 billion, to disperse to all our members for them to do the work that they need to do. It would be really fun to have that kind of money and make things happen.
And track the data involved in how it impacts the communities. And where that could go is so exciting. I love it. I love that vision. This is a funny question, but how do you know when you've had a good year at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, or even just for you personally? However you want to answer that.
Well, one of the things that's kept me at the Institute for so many years is I see the impact we've had on the municipal supply of discards and how towns are handling it. So I'd say a good year for us is if we've impacted what a city is doing, or we've helped a community composter launch or expand. Over time, we get emails and notes from audiences that we serve, and they're just oh, we loved your Spanish poster explaining composting, and we're sharing it with our local children's museum in our city. Or, we get comments like this all the time. And when I get those comments, it's just my heart is ready to burst. Okay, we're reaching people. So it's pretty excited when we hear from the communities we're serving. During COVID, we did some webinars with the U.S. Composting Council, and we did one in particular for how to navigate COVID if you're a community composter. And we had such a number of members of our coalition say, okay, I thought I was closing, but now you've helped me stay open. So it's a good year when we're helping people see what's possible, keep their business in operation, connect people to other models that are successful and helping people connect and learn from each other. So we do view ourselves as kind of a connector and helping to frame some of the issues.
That's a wonderful measure. Connection and when your heart knows. I love it.
There you
go. So Brenda, you are one of my composting heroes. And I remember when you came to Rhode Island to consult for Rhode Island composters, and I invited you to my compost operation. It was your first time there. It was so exciting to have you, my hero, on my own land. And I want to know, who is your composting hero? You've seen so many sites.
Well, talking about hearts bursting, going to get me emotional here, but okay, we can just fangirl about you, Jane. You have one of the most amazing sites I've ever been to, so you're definitely one of my heroes. I was just so impressed with the quality of the compost, the products you're producing, and just a beautiful, clean site. I always often tell people that visitors come and smell with their eyes. So it's nice when the piles don't smell, but it's also like an extra plus when things look beautiful and organized. So anyway, kudos to you.
Okay, I'm blushing.
I will say,
yeah, move on for me. Who else?
So who else? I just want to call out Benny Ares, who is the composting guru at an urban farm in Maryland called EcoCity Farms. And before he was with EcoCity, he worked for the University of Maryland. He was running their cow manure composting site. And when I first did composting training, I think it was back in 2002, maybe 2004, we went to see his site, and he was showing us how to run the equipment and the carbon dioxide measuring equipment and bunch of other equipment and running his turner. And then he's gone on to be a mentor of mine over, I don't know, more than a decade now. And he is running the most amazing composting activities at this urban farm that was on kind of blighted low-income housing that had drug dealers and people hanging out and trash. And he's converted into a food forest and an urban farm producing food for people who are typically left out of traditional food networks, affordable food networks. And they're engaging youth during the summer for not only growing food from the compost, but also cooking the food that they harvest. And he does bokashi, he does warm composting, he does hot composting. They just started a third farm in Maryland called their Farm Incubator Farm on 11 acres. And I love that they say, we grow food, but we also grow farmers. So for me, he not only produces a very high quality compost that's high in humic acids and it's just astounding. Like if you put it in a bucket of water, it kind of holds its shape, almost. It's like magic.
Yeah.
The compost when it's that high quality. But he has this vision of healthy soils and growing local food and meeting local community needs. And anyway, he's my hero.
Awesome.
He's just a model of local self-reliance.
There is something extra when a composter is also growing food, because you really can see that connection, that they get what they're trying to do, and the health aspects behind it, and just the reasons. Why are we doing this? Why are we making compost? It's to have healthy food for humans and the planet. So I like when that is tied in. So, all right, I'm going to have Benny on the show for sure.
Yeah, he'd be great.
This episode of the Composter Podcast is brought to you by High Country News. High Country News is an independent, nonprofit publication that has been covering the Western United States for more than 50 years. HCN provides unique, on-the-ground reporting on the land, water, wildlife, and communities of the region, with dedicated coverage of climate, environmental, and indigenous issues. Sign up for free newsletters or a trial of the magazine at hcn.org/no-till. This episode is also brought to you by Xsense. Xsense is an innovative company that provides home safety products, including cutting-edge smoke detectors, carbon monoxide alarms, and other smart home security systems designed to keep you and your loved ones safe 24/7. I'm excited to check out their humidity monitors, which will be helpful for monitoring the humidity while drying our farm's garlic. With easy-to-install devices and smart technology, you'll have peace of mind knowing that Xsense is always on guard. You can purchase Xsense products from xsense.com or simply search Xsense on Amazon. And now, back to the show. What is your vision for the future of composting, and how do we get there? Just a simple question for you.
Yeah, just a simple question. So, well, our vision of composting is one that's one, rooted in community, and that it's an infrastructure of your community, that you're building your capacity and your infrastructure for handling, your kitchen scraps, your yard trimmings, and other organic composting materials in your community through what I call a distributed or decentralized way.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're not just collecting it, giving everybody a toter, like a 30 or 60 gallon wheel toter, and collecting it and taking it 60 miles outside the community at some faraway industrial site. Our communities probably do need some regional facilities. And one of the benefits of larger scale sites is they tend to be able to handle a wider variety of materials, but they shouldn't be the only infrastructure. And so we promote, of course, when it comes to wasted food, you're reducing unnecessary, waste, and you're rescuing food that's still edible and can feed people. But then we think the issues of size and local could be a factor in the program and the strategy that's rolled out. And for, some of us are familiar with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's food waste hierarchy, which has, of course, reduce food waste and rescue food to feed people. But then in their hierarchy, it says energy recovery, and then composting is below it. Well, what about keeping it local? What about home composting? Where does educating folks at home to compost their food kitchen scraps and yard trimmings in their own backyards? And I did a report actually a few years ago called "Yes in My Backyard."
Mm-hmm.
And it was a guide for local governments, and we documented close to a dozen programs run by local government. And I found that home composting is really a huge opportunity that's underinvested and underappreciated. And just like with composting, regardless of what size you're doing it, one of the biggest factors of success for any composting activity is what? A trained operator. So if you set for success, if they know just the basics, it's not rocket science, but you still have to know what you're doing. You need the oxygen, you need the moisture, you need the right recipes, the carbon and nitrogen balance. You need to monitor your temperatures to reduce the risk of pathogens and other things, or if you don't want weeds growing, in your final compost in your garden. So we teach all that in the trainings we do. But people want to be set up for success. And when I do the trainings and I kind of go through some of the basics, they're like, oh, okay, now I know what I was doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You mean you can't just throw the food waste into your tumbler? Or, so, and the study that we did shows that is that like almost 3/4 of what people put out the curb every week as wasted food can be home composting, meaning it's not meat, it's not, greasy and oily, it's not the dairy, bones and stuff. So quite a bit of what people throw away can be handled in backyards. Now, I know not everybody is a home composter or wants to, and that's fine. But once we give every household a toter and we start carting it away, you kind of have lost that opportunity to kind of get people on board. And once a household starts home composting and is successful at it, they'll keep doing that as long as they're in that home. So now you're not picking, if you're a local government, you're not picking up that waste every week. You're saving money year and year and year. And I think since we're so good at collecting fall leaves and removing them from our neighborhoods, that one of the reasons we're seeing our mature trees being stressed out, certainly it's the weather, temperature variations and things like that, and disease, but we're removing all that organic matter from our backyards and we're not returning it. So the benefits of teaching people to do it locally, whether it's at schools or homes or, other kind of community venues, is just not only can be done quicker than building a large-scale facility, but I think it's essential and foundational in so many ways. So anyway, we do, reduce, rescue, home composting, community scale, farm scale, and then we have large-scale industrial kind of towards the bottom of the, the hierarchy, if you will. And so the vision really is thriving communities that are keeping these community assets within their community to engage the community, educate the next generation, involve them in the process, and keep building healthy soils locally. And so that's kind of our vision, I think, of the future of composting.
I love that. Keep all those natural resources where they originate from, as close to as possible to the backyard where it came from. And then expand out from that, Yeah.
And I'll just say, people ask me, what's your definition of community composting? And we have tried to stay away from picking a value in terms of like tons or fruit scraps a week or geographical within miles. It's basically the not so radical notion that you are making and using compost within the same community in which those materials are being generated, and that you're engaging the community in some way. You're educating them, you're serving the community. So like in a rural Vermont or Rhode Island, it could be within a 50-mile radius. I mean, we know of farmers that have got partnerships with schools, and they're setting up in rural areas community compost pods, like drop-off sites that are serving 20 households. But in an urban area like New York City, community composting may be more like an 8-block, radius.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends where you are, but it's basically the idea that you're making it and using it within the same community in which those materials are generated.
I appreciate a loose definition like that, because there's lots of definitions for community composter, and I never know where an operation like mine fits, if I'd be considered community or industrial or usually it's somewhere in between. But the way you just described it, we are a community composter. We happen to be large scale, but we serve our community. It's the gardens in our neighborhoods that are buying the compost that is from the resources here. And we do a lot of education here. So I think this is great. There's not like a size limit to community composting. That I appreciate that definition.
Yeah. And, we're trying to, we've said before, like community scale or small scale. And we have members within our coalition who have gone, Brenda, stop saying that, because you're implying it can't scale up, that you can't have a bunch of smaller sized urban or rural farmers or community sites that can't become the main way that we're handling these organic discards from our community. And I think there's something to that, back to the lexicon issue, right? How we frame what we're doing. And I'll just add to what you said about, even if, a farmer is doing something, they're not engaging the community. We are strong proponents of on-farm composters and farmers having the right to compost as an accessory activity to growing food and protecting their soils. So one of the things that we do is, I mentioned training, but we're doing kind of community composting training and home composting training. And we know a bunch of others that are probably better experts at doing the on-farm training, but we do a lot of policy work and policy advocacy. And one of the things we are trying to shift at the state and as well as local level with zoning is supporting farmers in their right to compost. We just had a major win in Maryland earlier this year, where the state passed a bill that expanded the exemption for farmers to get a permit from a 5,000 square foot footprint of activities to 10,000 square feet. So that's the kind of thing we want to be doing more now that there's kind of more clear regulatory roadmaps that helps farmers. But what they really need is now, how are you going to build the system? How are we going to get them funding, for the compost pad, the equipment, perhaps even marketing help? There's a lot that we can do through policy and regulations to help support farmers in doing this. And I don't know, Jane, as you running your own farm, you produce such a good product, you've been doing it for such a long time, if you're seeing that in Rhode Island.
Yes. We're very fortunate in Rhode Island that the Department of Environmental Management has really supported farmers in composting, encouraging it and knowing that that's a best practice on farms. So I'm feeling so fortunate that that's our path here, because I know that's not the case in a lot of farms. It's oftentimes a fight to be able to compost on your farm. So Rhode Island is ahead of many states in that aspect. So it's wonderful.
Good. I'm sure you had a role to play in that by operating such a great operation.
I would have to say that would be my dad. Yeah, he did that. Before I'm going to ask you about resources that you want to share with our listeners, but I wanted to say how valuable the ILSR webinars have been for me. I've appreciated them so much, and I wanted to give a big shout out. I'm actually headed to Austria in September because of the talk you guys put on, that webinar about composting in Europe. And I was so enthusiastic about what's going on in Austria. I've got to go see it for myself. So I hope that you know how much of an impact those are having on, a huge, there was people from all over the world, represented at that talk. And it's just an amazing resource. And I'm bringing my son, who's 15, to Austria with me. And I just can't wait to see, where is this going? Where is this going to go? This amazing education you guys have provided. So besides your webinars, do you want to talk about any resources for our listeners?
Well, yeah, let me just say a word about the Austrian model. And I think this ties into what we were just talking about with on-farm composting. So I don't have the numbers right here at my fingertips, but you can check it out. Florian gave an amazing talk on that webinar, and it's available to anyone. In Austria, it was a network of farmers that set the standards for the compost being produced. And then they have hundreds of municipalities that are sending their municipal food scraps, to that network of hundreds of farmers. And part of that process and the standards is they try to produce a very high quality compost. It's, obviously trying to avoid or reduce physical and chemical contamination. They prioritize fresh feedstocks. And there's just a whole set of practices that go along that. Now, when I have recommended kind of looking at that model and adapting it to the U.S., I've had some pushback from people in the industry. Oh, that would never work here. And I'm like, why not? Why not here? So I'm very interested to hear how your visit goes. And when you come back, let's talk about why not here? Why can't we adapt some of that strategy? Not all. Yeah. Austria is, a different country and a small country, but maybe some of that in the U.S. I'd be really interested in talking to you about that. But the webinars we have 2 series that are going on now. One is our series on farm composting. So if you're interested in particular about how to support on-farm composting, check that out. And then we have another series, which is how local government can support community composting. And we've been featuring cities that do that. We've been featuring community composters that have contracts with cities and their advice on how cities can do better. We've done some deep foci on how does New York City do it? We did one on upstate New York and some more rural communities recently. So, and we're always interested in helping to meet the need out there. So if someone has something they'd like us to focus on, we will take that up. In terms of the other resources, I mentioned the home composting guide. If you're interested in community composting, we have our guide to best management practices, community composting done right. We have this online community composting 101 certificate course, which is self-paced. It's got 7 modules. And it takes parts of the commercial composting operator courses, about all the key things that are needed to produce good compost or be successful. Like I mentioned, oxygen, water, bulk density, the air porosity in your pile, volume, all that good stuff. But then we make it appropriate for smaller size sites, like at schools or community gardens, urban farms. And then, one of the big parts of that is how do you, a lot of our sites are in urban areas. So what's a number one concern people have is, I'm sure your listeners can guess, it's rodents.
Yeah, rats. Yeah.
So we have a big part of the training that deals with how to avoid rats. And I'll just say, our cities, we just offer 24/7 buffets of open dumpsters and public trash cans. So the rats are already here in our communities, and we're not really managing our wasted food so well, which is why we have such a rat problem. So when we begin to manage, the food we're throwing away, and you're composting and removing it from the trash, you're actually getting a better control over the rodent problem. So a big part of our training is how to avoid rodents. And we did a separate guide on that, by the way, that we released last year. So I forget exactly what it's called, but it's how to avoid rodent problems at your community compost sites. And so check that out. And then we have posters and infographics. We did one on how compost combats the climate crisis. For some reason, we're really big into the C alliteration. So the Community Composting Coalition, cultivating community composting. But we've done a series of infographics on the benefits of composting. We've done a lot of work on jobs. There's one of our posters is showing, you get 1 or 2 jobs per 10,000 tons a year flowing into an incinerator or landfill. But when you have 10,000 jobs flowing into facilities, that's at least 4 times the number of jobs. But unlike an incinerator or landfill, you're actually now producing a commodity, a product. You're keeping that material circulating rather than destroying the material. So it's in the economy. So we did some research a number of years ago that showed if the compost is going into green infrastructure projects like roof gardens or bioswales or rain gardens, things of compost socks, that you're creating an additional 6 jobs per ton on that same 10,000 tons per year flowing into compost facilities.
Oh, that's a cool study.
So you're just getting more jobs through composting. So we have some data on that. We just released our census of community composters earlier this year, which looked at 86 community composters around the country and their community benefits, social, environmental, and economic. And we also identified the obstacles they're facing. So it's like access to land, permitting, back to policy again, So there's a lot of things that we could be addressing to help grow composting rooted and serving community. And, one of the things that came up, which I know, with your supporters like Comtech, is there's a lack of equipment sized for smaller size facilities. So often these community composters are like struggling to build their own system or their own screener because the mixers and the screeners are all sized for bigger sites. So there's a real need for equipment sized appropriately. And I think this is a growing field, and we hope some of these equipment manufacturers will look into this growing market share.
Yeah, for sure. That's really great. Oh man, so many resources through ILSR. It's amazing. Definitely worth sitting down and going through that website and clicking on all the links and listening to all the webinars. So awesome. Did you want to add anything else? Anything you want people to know?
Well, maybe this gets back to like, if I had a blank check, what would I spend it on? Or maybe the vision. I'll just add that I think that lifting up youth leadership and youth engagement is just so critical. And, young composters become old composters, and kids now, they want to impact change, and they have the agency to do it. And I just feel like working in composting and addressing the waste issue, the food waste issue, is something, that something they can actually have impact on. And we believe that, and I believe, I guess, that engaging youth is not only viable, but it's such a necessary tactic for kind of the transformative and durable change we want to see. And so we just absolutely need more investment in engaging youth, like getting into the school systems. Kids thrive through hands-on activity. I know to graduate high school, you need so many like community service learning hours in most of our public schools. So how can we harness the agency and the power that our youth have for change and get them involved? And I'm really interested in that kind of story and that kind of work as well.
Yeah. that brings the youth get engaged, and then 20 years later, they're the adults running the world. And if they're all into composting, we're looking at a pretty beautiful green world. So I like it. That's great. Brenda, you're just a treasure. This is amazing to talk to you. You've just a wealth of knowledge, and you've brought so much to the table. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being on The Composter.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and travel safely to Austria. And I'm glad you're bringing your kid.
Isn't Brenda Platt amazing? She's the breath behind the community compost scene. Definitely visit the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. There are so many resources for composters and community organizers at ILSR.org. Thank you, Brenda. So much appreciation for no-till growers for making this podcast happen, and my heart swells thinking about all the compost-loving listeners tuning in.